welcome back to the Business That Matters Spotlight. My name is Warren Coughlin. So building a team is a challenge for pretty much every entrepreneur I meet. And a lot of our entrepreneurs, though, they have the kind of a similar belief that just isn't true. It goes something like this. I'm really good with people, so I'm good at hiring. And at the risk of annoying you, I'm going to say, no, you're not. You're good at assessing people who are like you, but as your business grows, you need people not like you. And most people are simply not that good at assessing people not like them. And then once you have people, you also need to hire people who aren't just good, but who fit with your culture. It's no small feat. If you find yourself ever saying things like, why can't I find good people? Or there just aren't good people out there. These might be signs that you don't have all the skills you need to succeed in creating a high-performance team. And my guests today are a dynamic duo who will help you solve that problem. Tracy Posner and Catherine Graham, founders of the Ivy Group, and they are executive search consultants. And that's not just a fancy term for recruiters or headhunters. There's a material difference, and we'll get into that in a bit. And full disclosure here, I've referred multiple clients to Tracy and Catherine, and every one of them has been absolutely delighted, both with the experience and with the results. So we're going to have a bit of a wide-ranging chat about building a high-performance team. They may ask me some questions. I'll ask them questions. So Tracy and Catherine, welcome to the Spotlight.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Warren. It's great to be here too.
Nice to see you both. Now, what I always do at the beginning of the podcast is just in case people can't listen to the whole thing, I always want people who tune in to just get some value out of it as soon as possible. So I always ask my guests, what's one tip or piece of advice that you give right out of the gate? So in your case, like for people who are wanting to build a high performance team or a high performance leadership team, what would be one piece of advice you might give?
I'll step in. I would say know your culture and map the competencies that are required for success in each of those high-performing roles.
2 tips. Nice.
Extra value.
Extra value. And I think you've already called out what I think, which is very much don't hire mirrors of yourself. Look at your team, look at the skills and experiences that you have, and fill in the gaps. A lot of people like to hire a mirror of themselves, and that doesn't always work in creating a well-rounded leadership team.
Right. And do you find that a lot of people think that because they're really good with people, they can just hire and it won't be a problem?
I like them. I like this person. I want to work with them. I connected with them, which is wonderful. And you do want to like the people that you work with, but it's not necessarily the reason to hire them. That's a great time to have maybe a good lunch or dinner with those people and then evaluate them further.
Yeah. Right. And a lot of people do. I mean, not very many company leaders will say, oh, I'm a terrible judge of character. And most people think they are good judges of character, but as you said, that is really a reflection of their own internal biases and that projection.
Right.
We always go on about the mini-me hiring model.
All right, so let's talk about Ivy, your company. So how long has Ivy been around? How did you get started?
So Ivy has been around in different iterations for a long time, but Ivy itself with this brand has been around for 3 years, but it started a really long time ago. So, each of us have our own stories, of course, but ultimately it was a long career of recruiting for different types of companies, large ones. And I know you like to talk about culture, and so do we. And the culture didn't really line up, I think, with my values and Catherine's and our other partners not here today, Emily. So over the years of watching how recruitment worked, how it went, the strengths, the weaknesses, the pitfalls, I think we just decided that we could bring, and we'll get into what you said about executive search being different, executive search to anyone who really wants to use it, but make it accessible. So we wanted to have a good, happy culture. We wanted to deliver to our clients, and we didn't want to make it so out of reach that it was this mysterious thing that no one could have, right? So that's really why we did this. We love Canadian businesses. We love watching companies grow, and we love watching successes come out of our Canadian market. And we think executive search is a really important way, right? This is the whole, I'm great at hiring. Well, it takes a lot of practice and experience, and they probably could get there, but they don't have the experience that we have. And this way we're able to bring that to companies that aren't necessarily huge or publicly traded, but really need our services and need the right kind of leadership. So that's really why Ivy was developed. So honestly, we could have fun together. We could create a culture that we love. We can stick to our values, and I'm a bit corny, but they matter to me. I like to, enjoy what I'm doing and be ethical and deliver. And we've really been able to create that in a way that makes our clients happy and they come back to us because we build trust. I think that's the key thing we've done with Ivy.
But, actually, I want to add a little bit to that, is that because of the way executive search functions, which we'll explain a little bit later. But for me, what really drove me to start on my own and go out on my own and then eventually joined up with Tracy was the problem hiring organizations face when they come to go out and find talent. And there's always this confusion between like attracting talent to you and finding talent.
Mm.
And, the old method, and it still hasn't changed because I've been doing this quite a long time, you post, and most companies post because it's cheapest and it gives you the illusion that you are out in the market creating applicants and activity, when really what you're doing is you're reactive and you're not in control. And so you end up having to select from a candidate pool that you have not created. So that was what drove me into going out on our own, was to make that service available. As Tracy said, that you get an executive search, which is a very costly service, where you have people who go out and find people for you, was to make that available to organizations, owner-operated, small to medium-sized organizations, companies that are really the economic engine and driver of the Canadian economy, was to make that available to those types of companies that really hadn't been very thoughtful about how they go around finding people. So, it's called search for a reason,
Right.
right? It is about finding. And, even though it's easier to find people now, attracting people is a lot more difficult.
And so you've mentioned a couple of times about making it more available. So who do you work for? Who's your ideal client?
Our ideal client this could be a bit vague, but someone who really has a need to find someone specific, who will be challenging to find, who you're unlikely to have in your network, right? So a lot of people will say, well, Catherine said, we'll just post, right? So you might find a lot of people who might be interested, but there's a whole section of the market where they're not looking for a job, and they're not going to know that that's out there, right? So we're going to go out and we're actually going to find them. So who's going to be needing that? Anyone who's developing their leadership team, right? Or even sometimes it can be a sole proprietor sole contributor who has very specific things that they need to contribute to a team that may not be leadership, but they may have very unique and specific skills. So for us, it does tend.
What's an example of that?
An example of that would be, let's say someone is working in a finance department, but they're not the CFO and they're not really reporting to a team, but they're there to develop with the CFO corporate strategy. What are we going to do going forward? Are we going to do M&A? Are we going to organically grow? They have to come up with these strategies, right? They have to be very bright, a lot of exposure. Sometimes it's also with our clients who are doing a lot of M&A, buy and hold companies, those sorts of organizations where they have to be able to bring in business. They have to be able to help an organization be willing to sell and to buy and to be taken over by that company, but may not have a team doing that for them. So they have to be senior enough that a business owner is comfortable and willing to sell and thinks it's a good idea and believes it's a good idea. So they're not always going to have a team. So you have to have these, quite bright, powerful people who have a lot of skills. So typically for us, as I said earlier, it's often growing companies that are looking to do something different, to evolve, and to, sorry to use the word, but to innovate.
And is it more entrepreneur owned as opposed to larger?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Like it is, we do work best with owner-run, founder-run organizations where that you're the direct decision maker. You're usually operating leanly. You might not have dedicated HR support, or if you do have it, it's very much more around the administrative side of HR and not as much about the strategy. And those are, as Tracy said, those are organizations that are growing, or they're preparing perhaps for transitioning out, perhaps selling their business and know that they need to enhance some of their processes in order to get a better valuation. So those would be an example of clients that we deal with. Private equity and their portfolio companies frequently come to us as well. Another really area that's increasing for us as clients are B Corps, values-driven organizations that are, while still focused on profit, it is profit within the context of social impact, which does create a whole different decision-making paradigm. So and
guests on this show were B Corps.
Pardon?
We've had many guests on this show.
Yes. Yeah, and it's a real growing area of the economy, and you work hard to get that certification.
Mm-hmm.
So it is. I mean, bigger companies have invested a lot more in creating their people. They have the resources. They spend the time. They spend the money. They have talent development, performance management strategies all in place. So those companies know how to recruit for the most part, because they're succession. They build up the people and they pick people, the high performing people, and then they develop them. So we really work with clients who haven't had the resources to do that.
And so let's get into the difference. So I imagine there's people listening to this who I've heard of recruiters, and they just spray and pray, and they go out and find a bunch of people, throw anybody at it because they're going to get paid as long as I hire somebody. And there's some cynicism out there, right? And, you and I, we work together, so I know you guys are different. So what's the difference in your view of being, this executive search consultant versus that probably inaccurate but common stereotype?
Or potentially accurate. I actually have a bit of an unusual background for a recruiter. Often people will do that kind of recruiting you're talking about, the spray and pray, or they'll do executive search. I was lucky in that I did 5 years of more of a post and pray, kind of what we call contingency, versus what we do now, which is a retained executive search model. It's a hard term when you say headhunter, but it's that traditional thing. And it is kind of what we do, and that's the difference. So you can kind of spray and pray or post and pray, right? So you're going to put up a posting, and anyone who's looking for a job may or may not see it. It's very unlikely that people who are not looking for jobs will be seeing it. So the idea with contingency is that you work with clients, you have a bunch of resumes, you probably know a lot of people in one spot, you've already interviewed people that you think might be okay, and you send a bunch of resumes and you hope for a match. And that can work in certain instances. But when you need someone who's very, very high performance, you don't necessarily want to pick from the group of people who have come to you. You want to understand your client, the company, who are they, what matters, what are they looking to achieve, what's going to matter in a year from now, and what's going to build on their team. So once we understand the company, then we really understand the function. What is the person going to be doing? We understand the role inside and out. And ideally, we actually work on or even write the job description for you or with you. Everything is a partnership. Once we then really understand, we go out and we originally headhunt every single time. So yeah, of course, we have a network, we have a database that has great people, but that's not our go-to. We think each search is original. This is what's happened with us always. And we go out and we literally will break down the market. Is it geographical? Are they going to be in Canada? Where in Canada? Which companies will we find them? Which roles, which titles, which levels, which sorts of company? So a lot of time goes into the research and figuring out who we think could be good for the role. Once we've then decided what the market looks like based on research, then we'll start approaching people. So Catherine said, yeah, the finding's hard and that it takes time and you have to know, but it's the attracting. Once you've reached out to them, how are you doing it? How are you getting their attention? And how are you having a conversation? So already this is a really big difference. And that's only the very beginning of the search, because for us, we are committed, we paid up front as a retainer, at least partially. There's multiple payments throughout, but we're committed and we're in it till the end. If it takes 8 weeks or 9 months or 12 months, that's okay. We're going to be with you to do it. So it's always about evaluating the candidates, carrying them along for the ride, making sure everyone who's been part of the process, whether they get the job or not, got value out of it. The clients learned something, the candidates had a good experience, and they feel there was value. And at the end of the day, our clients can say, okay, I've seen enough of the market. I understand what's out there. We get a sense of skills, experience, compensation, and they have a very, very padded opportunity to make a decision.
It's also like the difference too is contingency recruitment is when you as the employer, right, pay a recruiter when you actually hire somebody. It's and you look at it relative to the number of people that are doing something. It's a demographic. It's a data game, because lower entry level positions where there's more people, more talent available, contingency works very well. Or very positions that are very skills based, that you're really hiring for, like IT. A lot of times in IT, you're hiring for technical competency. You're less concerned about their leadership style or their communication style, unless you want to grow that person into that role. So those types of functional areas that are heavily skills dependent, and where there's a lot of people who do them, and you can test their capability with administering some kind of assessment test about, can you do Java or whatever. Contingency can work very well in that world. Where it doesn't, and that's you, and you only pay, and that's a model that most people are familiar with, because it just makes sense, because there's more of them, and they're recruiting in areas that are the functions have more people in them. It's when you start getting perhaps into like a little bit more scarcity around the talent that you're looking for, or perceived scarcity, let's say, that the recruitment, the executive search consultative style really adds value, because all the points that Tracy was making about understanding the hiring organizations culture. And a lot of hiring organizations don't even really know their culture. I mean, they haven't really, particularly founder run ones, because they've been, their heads down, they're successful, things are working for them. And then they hit that blip that you talked about, Warren, where it's, oh, there's no talent out there. And we hear that all the time, which is actually a myth. It is out there. It's just how you go about finding it, or how you go about deciding what it is that you need. So the best way we start to work is when it's like middle management and up, when you're actually those people that you're going out to hire, you truly think are going to become leaders in your company. And then it's worth the investment that you need to make in order to work with a skilled executive search consultant. Because we literally, as we said, we are headhunters. We will work with you, and we know where that talent has acquired the skills that they need. And we go out and we break those organizations down, and we literally go in and approach people. And these are people that we are attracting based on their understanding of what they want out of their career. So these are motivated people. Now, if you're working in a larger company, sometimes you can't take people out of these companies, because the companies have spent time to take care of people, to retain people. So retention actually starts with recruitment. So it's as Tracy mentioned, it gets to be a very complicated, nuanced, kind of tangled ball of a twisted up ball of yarn. Then we're able to pull the right strands and get to those people. So, and then people get confused. Well, how do I find people? Like the technology then comes into play, and it causes a whole another layer of confusion in the marketplace. But that to me really is the difference with an executive search person and a contingency recruiter. Both have their place in the market, but we're really much more of value to an organization when you are really focused on the leadership and management talent, as opposed to just the pure skill.
We partner with our clients. That's the thing. We become a true partner for them throughout the whole process. It's we're an extension of them. We're together. We spend a lot of time together throughout the search process, and we are with them side by side until it's done.
I remember a couple of instances where, the client thought that they knew which was going to be the candidate, and you were able to just sort of slow them down, go through the analysis, and then over time, their priorities changed, and who they thought was the top candidate changed. And I thought that's an underappreciated value, is that consultative approach really help, because a lot of entrepreneurs are, and if you're listening to this as an entrepreneur, take a look in the mirror. You're probably a fast decision maker. You make a lot of decisions intuitively and emotionally. And what I was really impressed with your process was the ability to guide the client through good decision making without necessarily like surfacing your preferences, but just making sure that their choice aligned with what they actually needed and were looking for. And I thought you were able to like really patiently accept, their sort of emotional responses, but also guide them without them feeling like they were being delayed or anything. I thought it was very subtle, but also really super effective.
I'm so glad you picked up on that, because you weren't in the process every day, but you heard what was going on. And it's important for all of us, right? We're talking about people. And I'm someone who tends to be very trusting, and I really like people and I like being around them. So I know that about myself. So I also have to be careful, right? So every time we talk to a candidate, whether it's an email, that first call, however we communicate throughout, we are always evaluating them. And interviews are great, but they can be performance, and that's not always who the person is. So we have to evaluate them at every step. And for the kind of roles we're talking about, which do tend to be senior leadership, we also love to throw in assessments, which we can talk about just to test ourselves, because this is something we're looking to ensure we're getting right for our clients. And it's never about, I think they're right, or I could do the same thing. Maybe I like them. Maybe I'm doing what I say my clients do. Am I hiring a mirror of myself, or are we really solving the problem? And that's why we try to bring in, like we said, the right job description, the right kind of research. Like you said, we test them along the way and let them spend time with each candidate, get to know them, and really make sure that they know who they're getting, right? Nothing will be perfect, but I think you get the closest you can. And then you look at what some of the tensions could be. You're already prepared for them, and that sets you up for success along the way. And there's the retention Catherine was talking about. It starts from the beginning. We want this to be a very lasting placement for our clients. We want them to get everything they want out of it. And even though they're our clients, we want that for the candidate. We want the candidate to have great success and to enter their career at one stage and come out bigger and better.
So
or not bigger, they don't want bigger, just better.
Where do you see people get it wrong? Not just in working with you, but like in their own recruitment, like just to provide value to people out there. If they're like, I'm not sure if I can do
clients or candidates, because it's different on both sides.
Where they get it wrong?
Who are out there, on their own trying to hire. Like I'm sure you've gone into organizations and thought, what the hell is this person doing here? You've heard horror stories, right?
Yeah, we'll need a whole podcast for this one.
They get it wrong because the position profiles aren't properly structured. The expectations for the performance expectations for the role, these are difficult areas, actually. I mean, because you tend to take it for granted because it's something that's supposed to be, like, as we started off by saying, everybody thinks they're a great judge of character. So they all think, oh, I'm just going to put up a post and I'll have a bunch of people apply. Well, right then you've totally limited your candidate pool because you've only got people who are actually looking. And you now put yourself in a position of being reactive. So they haven't looked at the position profile, because that takes work. It's hard work to literally decide what it is that you want, because people will have a tendency, to throw everything in the kitchen sink into a position profile. We see it time after time after time. They don't really think through the unreasonable expectations that they're bringing to the table. And furthermore, you're dealing with, in many cases, a geographic constraint. That candidate has to literally go to an office. I mean, that's coming back stronger now. So therefore, you're limiting your talent pool already. So giving careful thought to the position profile and taking yourself out of the process, because you inject all your own assumptions, all your own biases, all your own beliefs, all your own expectations, and you layer those onto a person. And you could be totally wrong. You're making the choice for the person without giving them an opportunity to literally explain what it is that they're doing. So that's, to me, is where you get it wrong the most, is actually at that very initial stage of creating and crafting the position profile. And then the second place where you get it wrong is how to go out and find that talent. And I mean, that's another area where as soon as you start limiting your candidate pool, then you're going down a different path.
Right. And do you find, like, this is actually one of the things I speak to clients about a lot, is they get the, oh my God, I don't want to be overwhelmed with resumes.
Yeah.
So they actually consciously narrow the pool so that they don't have to be overwhelmed by looking through 150 or 200 resumes. And I always say, like, if you use some kind of screening mechanism, so you don't have to read 150 or 200 resumes, and your organization is a way of doing that screening. Yeah. As a philosophy, I always want to encourage people, like, cast your net as wide as possible so you can find that diamond in the rough. But if you just search in this little narrow area, you're going to miss a lot.
It just takes so much time, right? Yeah. To go and cast it wide. We have time because that's all we do. But
well, it depends. Yeah, it also depends on the level of the role and what the expectations are, right? Because, in some cases, you can create screening criteria, but those, it can be very limiting. And you can actually, we've worked with clients, say in critical director level roles, that are succession potential for them. And they're doing it, we're conducting the search. They've decided that they're going to post it all. And we go on and work with their applicant tracking system. And they've got somebody in HR creating screening questions. They start missing people because the screening criteria, and you're depending on a system, and if the screening criteria isn't well thought out, you start, and then what we have seen is people who literally have applied for a position, and we're running a parallel search at the same time. So we're out in the market, actually literally headhunting. And sometimes we will come across the same person that has applied for the position, was rejected by the screening system, but yet becomes on the short list of the candidates. So it's the thought that goes into it. And for most people, it's about, they're thinking about, I need to reduce the workload on me, which, obviously is a legitimate thing, because when you're hiring off the side of your desk, guess what? It doesn't get priority. So that's why we have very creative ways of partnering with our clients in terms of the service that we provide to them, because and the way we can work with them on a fee basis as well, because it is about making sure that they do get the best result.
Right. And so what's one of the challenges in this, I think is pretty common too, is there's a balance between not compromising, and waiting for the right person, but also acknowledging that maybe for your budget and the state of the market, you're unlikely to get the superstar that you really want. Like sort of some mid-level organizations, if you're like competing with Google for the top, software engineer, you may not be able to do the $400,000 salary, so you're not going to get that top person. So like how do you navigate those
top can be proven or unproven, right? Like sometimes you can find, because we're good at this, I think, you can find emerging talent who could be ready to do it, right? But I think if a client says, look, we're small, we want to hire the top developer from Google, and we have a budget of $150,000, we will say, listen, what are you trying to achieve? And what is going to be most important? And then we'll have to craft something that matches the market, because we'll only be setting them up for disappointment. Mm-hmm. Some clients really push against that, and we'll do our best to put in front of them really, really high potential people. But it's just, we are a bit of a reality check. So as much as we are a service industry, we like to make our clients happy, we're not afraid to give the truth and to be consultative and to say to them, we don't think that's realistic. And if they disagree, that's okay. We can also do pipelining. We'll go into the market, we'll get a sense, and we can show them. We've spoken to X amount of people based on this research. Here is the comp we've been being told. What do you think? Right? So we arm them with information so they can make good decisions. Sometimes you just feel you want something and it's exciting and it sounds great, but it's not realistic. So we don't want to completely let them down. There is usually a compromise. Hopefully it's not giving up on something, but it's finding what's more right for your company at that stage.
And you're not actually, because every person has their own kind of pond that they swim in, right? Every cultural milieu that they're going to flourish in. And so to use that example of a top developer from Google, that person has to be surrounded by hundreds of other top performers, because they need to feed off of those neural networks. And they're top performers in a narrow context. So you take them out of that environment and you put them in another environment, they aren't necessarily top performers. You see it in sports all the time, right? A superstar player from one team, and you take them out and put them in another team, and they're not as good anymore because they don't have that team around them. So I don't really think you have to keep what's best for your organization. That's what has to be first and foremost in your mind. But again, and then of course, what people do is they just kind of fall back on sort of default ways of thinking about, what creates excellence? Well, excellence can be a subjective criteria relative, again, to what you need in your culture.
So let's shift to one of the things I always find fascinating is whether and the extent to which academic studies match up with real world experience. So folks like me are always out there blathering on about how culture is important in recruiting because there's lots of studies say that that's what people told them in surveys they care about. But you're like in the quiet back room having private conversations with people. So in the reality of those one-to-one meetings you have with job seekers, who are up there considering their options, how important actually is culture? Like, did they say, oh, this place pays a bit less, but I'm going to go there because the culture is better? Is that a real thing that people are doing?
Yes, sometimes. Did you say no, Kath? And I said yes.
No, I agree. I think it's it's a complicated question.
It is a
because
complicated.
I think a lot of people don't really understand what culture is for them.
Yeah.
They literally think it might be, we work 4 days a week. Well, that is a form of a culture, but a lot of people, it's hard for them to define, as it is for organizations, unless they've gone through a deliberate and intentional exercise to define their culture, highlight, identify, and any organization can do this. And this, it might appear to be a costly kind of investment initially, but it's one of those types of investments that yields such positive return over time.
And it is sometimes I do that work, and it's actually I've got processes that make it pretty easy.
It's
but people and then they don't correlate that investment in the culture defining with the success that they have later on when they're bringing people into the organization, or they're working with poor performers that they have, but they're able to coach them and identify their gaps and create high performers out of them. So all of that kind of intangible stuff out there sometimes gets hard for people to wrap their minds around. But I would say, yes, in Tracy, I think culture, when people can identify their values, if you've got a self-aware person, because why can we take people out of companies? Because usually their values aren't aligned with the culture. They're stuck, and you pick that up, and people might not consciously say that, but you start hearing them talk, and it's clear they're in a company. Maybe there's somebody they're much more like, it's a sales-driven culture, right? That implies certain types of behaviors. If you're not a sales-driven person, you're not going to flourish in that culture. So if you're somebody who if your style of interacting is, maybe you're in a sales-driven culture that's very driven, right? Like it's very get to the answer, get to the close right away. But if you're not someone who does that, you're more of a consultant, you're not going to flourish. So
there's two things that I think, Warren, like every chance we get, we would love for you to come in to our clients and set up those competencies. But not every client, and this is something I wanted to ask you later, is willing to go ahead and take the time to do that. But something that we do at Ivy is that we do not, pick out the competencies per se the way you do, but we really get to know their culture. We've placed a lot of people, often they're repeat clients. We know them, and we can really describe their culture to candidates on current searches. And that can make a really big difference. And often if someone's had a bad experience, they'll say, okay, yeah, I know how important culture is. But if, it depends. Sometimes culture matters so much. Will they leave for a little bit less? Yes. If they think there's potential, there's opportunity for career growth, and they can really develop themselves. But rarely will someone leave, a lateral move to go somewhere else for less money. So, and just for culture, we see it sometimes, but often it's culture and opportunity to learn and grow. But they're not going to take a big step back. Typically, we like to have people's lives get better with a move from every perspective, from a compensation perspective, opportunity, and culture. Like those are the three things. But sometimes we have clients who are so good and so high performance, and their social values are wonderful. And people have come from larger organizations that don't have high social values. And we have seen them come to some of our clients and be so happy and every day say, what a great move I made. But we have to uncover them and have conversations and understand what drives and motivates them.
I think this is such an important thing for people to hear, because one of the things I always struggle with as a business coach for me is I try to be very accurate in what I'm communicating with people. Like there's a lot of the, Entrepreneur Magazine, 7 Keys to Success kind of, but there's a real tendency to dumb down and oversimplify things. And so a lot of this research around culture is like, 80% of people are willing to take a pay cut for a better culture. And I've always thought, it's a more nuanced discussion about the entire package of an experience of what people are getting. And I think people need to be conscious of that when they're going into the market, looking for people on the one hand. But on the other hand, what you also just said, which I think is so critical, is people aren't going to bail necessarily if they're in a good culture. Like you
No, they're
just,
not.
if values are aligned, hard to recruit people away if their values are aligned, but it's easy to recruit them away if their values aren't aligned. And so the implication of that for an entrepreneur listening is if you actually invest the time to build a strong values aligned culture, that's a defensive position.
Hugely.
Keep your people. It may not be the thing. You may not be saying, well, somebody's going to take a $50,000 pay cut to come to us, but to leave, a $10,000 raise may not be enough to entice them away because this place is so great. Is that a fair?
Absolutely. I would say that.
Yeah.
And I think, it's constantly evolving, and this whole focus, I mean, these terms are thrown around loosely, like culture and values, but they are nuanced concepts that are definitely require some self-awareness on an individual's part to understand what it is that they are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And a well-managed search process, which is what we do, partnering with you, brings that out in people. We start to surface it through all of the types of conversations that we're having. And this is where the art of it kind of comes in. It's because it's not always a precise science, but I mean, we're assembling a candidate pool that we've gone out. We've had conversations with these people, and we learn about what it is in their current environment that isn't working. And those are triggers about the culture. So when you start as a potential candidate or as a hiring organization, when you start exploring the fit with each other, you have to be attuned to the language that people are using. I mean, that's something that you can do without having, if you haven't invested in an exercise to define what your values and your culture are, but truly listening to what that person is saying. And you can get at it sometimes, so for candidates, we can go on and on about a culture of a company, but Tracy and I don't work at that company, right? We only know what our clients tell you. And the culture is such an intangible thing that you don't really know what it is until you're in it, right? So how can you, make sure that you get as much information as you can beforehand? So we always encourage our candidates when they start meeting with a client to really go with the mindset that they too are interviewing. They're interviewing that client as much as it's vice versa. And a really good recruitment process, and we've done this recently, we encourage conversations at the beginning where you can get to really get to understand each other. And then you can move into a more of a interview-based process where it is perhaps trying to really get an example of how someone operates under pressure and makes decisions. And then you can give them some case studies that can help surface that. And I think Tracy mentioned earlier, we like to rely on it. We like to use solid assessments as well. And there's a number of, and that science, that people science, as it's now becoming to be known as, that's evolving again because it's so much easier now to get more data. So you can have higher degree of statistical validity and reliability in some of the assessment tools that you use. And I wouldn't base my hiring decision purely on a result of an assessment test, but you can factor it in as a piece of data, and they will show you how people react under pressure sometimes. So
can you talk a little bit about that? Like, can you share what assessment tools you use or how you use them? Like because you just said it's not definitive. Like I use some too, and it's like, you don't make the hiring decision based on it, but how does it influence? Does it just inform the questioning, or does it inform your culture assessment?
It informs everything. I mean, as you know, you can get assessment tools that I frankly think we should use them earlier in the process because they actually will generate some questions that you can probe further. So we've had some good experience with tools like DISC. We just recently had a client who wanted to use the Myers-Briggs as a hiring tool, a selection tool, which is a common mistake many people make because it's not about, that is a tool that really tells working style and how you're going to interact with the team. And you can use that as a data point in hiring if you've decided that you've mapped your whole organization and you need more of an INTJ type of profile. These are you have to know Myers-Briggs to get into that. But really the tools that we find more appropriate are ones that really try and get at how a person's going to perform at work.
Yeah, I always say this, if the quadrant-based stuff is very descriptive,
Yes.
whereas
The personality.
more predictive.
Yes, predictive is important. So we use DISC, which we find they have some good predictive there. We also have another one called System 3, which is actually a Canadian-based tool that is a simulation tool based on actually you participate in a video interview. And Tracy and I both done it, and you're positioned as, and then it's your answers are mapped towards. They've created a standard benchmark for leadership based on interviewing hundreds of Canadian senior executives,
High performance
ones, and then then your responses are it's competency based, and your responses are then mapped relative to the benchmark, and it identifies really it shows where your gaps and strengths are, and the fact that it's a simulation based one and not like a multiple choice kind of thing, it really you get drawn in.
And a lot of it is based on judgment and decision making, which is different than others. And what we love about this one is that it's coachable, some of it. So often you'll do one of these assessments. It's just who you are. It's fully baked in. You're not going to change. We know what to expect. It's predictive, like you said. This one's interesting because we can say, map your team. What does it look like? Who are we interviewing? Where do they need to be bolstered? Where do they need to be, sort of controlled? And it really helps you figure out, can we hire them and where will they need to be coached? And that really can help predict performance.
Yeah. And you can map if you do your whole executive team or leadership team, you can do the whole company if you wanted to, but you really literally will get an idea. It helps define your culture, and it actually gives you something visual to work with. So what's
that one called again?
It's called System 3. Yeah, and it was developed by a former executive search person who really understands this stuff and thought, we do not have a tool in the market that is what I'm looking for. And they actually went to System 3 and built it. So it's a Canadian business with really good, strong science behind it. And so we're finding it a really useful tool that we like. And we tried a few assessments, and we do like to present our clients as different options depending on what their challenge is. But, between what Catherine is saying with what we use with Thomas, which can be DISC and a leadership assessment, System 3, and we also sometimes work with someone who has a lot of data around startups called Above and Beyond. Those are sort of the 3 organizations that we work with. Can I just say one other thing before we were talking about entrepreneurs? And I just wanted to say that it is so rare that we'll call someone who will say, you know what, I'd love to talk to you, but I'm just so happy where I am right now. My culture is so good. So I know it's going back to that. It's rare. But often, honestly, when it happens, I'll say, look, we'll talk and I'll fill you in, but I have no interest in pulling you out of something you're totally happy in. It's rare. And so as an entrepreneur who knows how hard it is to hire, how hard it is to retain, and how important it is, if you treat your people well, it's a lot easier to keep them. And often I'll say to them, well, why are you so happy? What is it? Well, we're engaged. We know what's happening. We have a shared vision. My leader's engaged. They care about me. It's often communication and engagement, right? If you have a team of people who want to be there, it makes a huge difference. One of our clients, their whole thing is, we will not micromanage. We want to hire adults who want to be here. And at the end of the day, if they feel like they accomplished something and they feel good, we're doing something right. If they come in and they really don't want to do it, that's okay. They're just not for us, right? So that's what really works. So it's critical, and we forget how important it is to engage with all of the people on your team, because you lose one and it can make a big difference.
So let me pick up on that, because that's one of the things I find really interesting is how important, how do I ask this? But how important is it that in terms of successfully building a team that is retained for a long time, that the owner actually cares about their people?
How involved is the owner, right? If the owner is involved, they need to care, right? Whoever is leading and engaged day to day needs to care. So if you think about board governance, we always say that the key with the board is, they always say, fingers out, noses in. You know what's happening, but you're not touching anything. The board needs to care about the company's success and health, but the leadership has to care about the people, or at least be awfully good at giving the impression that they do, right? So they have to engage. It's just, it's a must, right? Unless you're someone who's just really truly one of those, sole contributors who sits at a computer and is deeply analytical and doesn't want anything else. You're just so focused on your world. Otherwise, the rest of it matters a lot.
It matters hugely. And I think it's perhaps one of the biggest inhibitors for company growth is when, and companies will reach plateaus and they can't seem to figure out what else to do. And it often is generated by the fact that the founder, the owner, or the senior leaders are checked out and they don't care. And we human beings, we know that. We pick up on it. And so if you have that sense that you don't matter, and your contribution doesn't matter. I mean, it sounds like, motherhood and apple pie, but human beings need to be nurtured. And
so true.
That's when you get the best out of them.
And a lot of our clients will get to a point where they're growing and they're great and they're, 20, 30, 40, 50 million, but you hit a certain point where things have to change, right? You have to hire a little bit more senior, a little bit bigger, and you have to make that shift. And that's also a point at which bringing in these competencies and these assessments are so critical, because how do you want to grow? Where do you want to be? When you're small and you're a leader and you're a CEO and you've built this amazing company, it's gone great. That's wonderful. But you hit a point where you can't control as much. You can't have your eyes on everything and you need a team. And that's the point where you have to say, okay, we did a great job building this company. What are our competencies? How did we get there? And how can we protect this amazing thing that we've built as we get bigger? And that's where we love to work with you and then with assessments to make sure that everything's being thought of for our clients. They're not always going to know this and think about it or able to prioritize it, but we do for them. We always say, can we bring in the assessments? Can we bring in the competencies? We always like to do background checks. Sometimes they'll say, don't do references. We'll never accept that. We have to do references. Like, let's get it all done and make sure it's right so we can look back and say it was done right. So we're very disciplined about doing that because it matters.
Yeah. Now, what about, I've had this conversation with a few clients, and I think it's important for entrepreneurs to hear this piece too, that there's a lot of groups out there where they're kind of testosterone driven. You must be growing, you must become big, you must make lots of money. And there's some people who are like, you know what, that's not what I want. Like, I've got a certain lifestyle, or I've got, I have a group of clients I want to service. And I sometimes use a sports analogy. Like, you might be a really good college level team, but it's not a team that's going to play in the NBA or the NHL, right? Other organizations say, no, we want the NHL or the NBA team. And those are different recruitment objectives. Right? Like, recruiting to the really good college level, you want to bring in good people, but they're not the same people who are going to play at the NBA.
No, they're not.
Or the NHL. And so, like, how do you make that assessment with people as to where they are? Like, I've had this conversation a lot with clients. Like, do you want NBA, NHL, or do you want to be college junior? And
you don't always have to aim for MBA. You have to first know your client. What do they want? Where's their stage? What are they looking to achieve? Why and how? And that's how, some companies, they need the NBA player and some don't. So it comes back to, we get it.
It's okay.
There's a place for college MBA. You need that. You need all those sports teams, and companies are like people. Everyone is different, and not everyone has to be bigger and more profitable. Some want that, some don't. Not for profits. Often they're not there to grow. They're sometimes there to solve a problem. Each company is there for a different reason, right? And we're there to hear them. We're not there to say, oh, you need this person because we think they're the top performer. What we want to understand is, what is top performance for you in your company and your goals? And then we match that. We don't try to put on our who we like, who we think. We'll really understand what you need, and we do the best to make the match, recognizing we're also people, which is why, again, we layer in the assessments, the confidence, all of it.
I mean, I have seen, because I've done this for a long time, at very different levels. I have seen situations where we will try and bring, because the company hasn't really articulated it, your hiring organization, and you bring truly an A player, and it becomes clear through the process that that's not what the company or hiring organization needs. And then they will start to self-define and so what they need. And it's a bit of a painful process sometimes too. Again, it gets back to the level of conscious awareness that you as a hiring organization have of your company and its needs and goals. And for lots of organizations, they don't always have those articulated. So they think they want the A player. You bring them an A player, and that A player is not going to function or flourish in that environment. And that A player will self-select out as well, because the process signals to them that you're not dealing with an MBA team. You're dealing with a college team, right?
Exactly. And the process is partly us, right? Saying to them, this is a really good person, but they may not be a really good person for you, right? That's what it's always about.
And sometimes hiring organizations need to go through that in order to really articulate what they want. And what we do when we're partnering with organizations like that, because, some of them, they have to trust us. And so some hiring organizations, they trust you over time and they give you more information over time. But we like to be transparent with potential candidates when we approach them, that this is a process. And, we're offering you an opportunity to explore. We're offering our hiring client an opportunity to explore. And we hope that this is a beneficial interaction for all people involved. And as recruiters, because we have called you, we have disrupted your life, we take that responsibility very seriously. And we want to be able to manage and relate to those candidates so that they know that it wasn't the right opportunity for them all along.
We'll never sell them anything, and we'll never sell our client a candidate. We never want to do that. We will tell them the truth. Here's the opportunity. Here's why we found you and reached out to you and why we think it could be interesting. What do you think? And we'll have a conversation, right? And then we'll evaluate them and we'll say to our client, look, we think this person's strong because of, and we'll talk, but we'll say, but here's what you worry about. So like I said at the beginning, no one's perfect and we don't expect them to be. It's just the right match at the right time. That's what it's always about. For us, it has to be right. It has to last. And we have to feel that everything is lining up or it's not right.
And one last question around is, what's the impact of the economy on the talent pool right now? Like, so we're right now in April 2024. The inflation has been high and interest rates are fluctuating, and there's insolvencies are up.
Yep.
Does it affect the talent pool, and does it affect compensation? Is this a buyer's market, seller's
It's
market?
a weird market, Warren. It's something we've never seen, right? During COVID, it was weird. We thought things would slow down, but it was really, really busy and compensations were flying. They were so high that people in the market were demanding what their compensation would be, to the point where it was very uncomfortable for our clients. Now it's kind of a little bit different, right? A lot of people are looking for jobs right now. Interest rates are high. We've heard that a lot of our clients are trying to reduce, any extra spend right now. So I think everyone's in a bit of like self-preserve mode right now. So a lot of conversations, a lot of planning right now. But there's there's a big transition going on right now. It'll be very interesting to see how it shakes out. But we're suspecting that by summer, September coming around, there's going to be a lot of new hiring, because we've seen a big holding pattern across the Canadian market in terms of hiring senior leadership, aside from critical functional roles. If your CEO is leaving, if your CFO is leaving, you have to replace those people, right?
Yes,
but that's sort of my perspective.
I mean, I've been through 3 of these down cycles now, and advantage of being around for a while. There's definitely a lot of good talent out there. But, it's interesting because a lot of the people who are out there have come from larger companies, larger corporations. And, you have to be able to fit them into a more entrepreneurial, less structured type of environment. And again, that can be a coachable opportunity, because some people can make that transition. But some people have become so accustomed to operating within the scaffolding and the protection of larger hierarchical decision-making structures that it's scary for them to kind of sometimes step out of that space and take a risk in a different type of culture. So while they might have the skills you need, they might not necessarily be the best fit for the organization, who needs to be prudent about how you invest your hiring dollars.
Well, listen, you guys have been really generous with your time. I appreciate it. Just a couple quick wrap-up questions about you. What's for each of you? What's one personal quality? I always ask this is what I always ask every guest. So the two of these. What's one personal quality that you most had to overcome to succeed?
Mm.
I think for me, it was making assumptions.
Mm.
It's so easy to fall into that trap.
For me, it was, I think, seeing enough to feel like I think I've seen every possible thing that can go wrong in different iterations, but saying, yeah, I think I know how to handle each one of these problems. And if my client trusts me, I think that they're making a good choice, right? I had to really get to the point where I thought, if I were a client running this business, would I hire me? And as soon as I got to the point where I thought, yes, that's when I was ready. So time, practice, experience, and that's it. I think. I mean, there's probably a million other things.
And so what's the quality that most contributed to your success?
I think it's so corny, but I really, really care about the outcome. I really do.
I don't think that's corny. I think that's
okay, good. Because I really do. Like, I want my clients to be so happy and to, and the candidates a few months later, a few years later to say, wow, if it wasn't for that outreach or this connection, my life would be different and wouldn't be as good as it is now, right? And sometimes, you place people who have an equity position. The next thing you know, their lives are a lot more luxurious than they were before they met you. And all of those things are nice things for us. So I really think that's what drives me to do it. And I work with my great partners too, which is a lot of we have a great culture.
I mean, for me, I think it's curiosity. Has been really irrelevant. It's just trying to understand what really makes you tick, what makes that company tick, what makes that founder tick, what makes that not-for-profit tick. So I do think it's a curiosity.
That's great. I always think a lot of success happens with empathy, and the two qualities that actually drive empathy are curiosity and humility. So the curiosity is a big piece. Well, listen, thank you very much for being on. How can people find you? Where should they go if they're interested in learning more?
They can find us on LinkedIn, or they can find us at our website, myivy.co.
.co.
Yes, .co. And then we need another podcast. We have many questions to ask you. So we'll need another one when we can hear your perspective.
That'd be great. Anytime.
That would be fabulous. Okay. Thank you. It's great to talk to you today.
Thanks very much.
Lovely conversation. Thank you.